Welcome to the Pastor and Intern Podcast with Pastor Eric Dyer and intern Will Emery. In today's episode, we will be discussing the tragedy occurring in the Southern Baptist Convention. I want to begin the episode by advising you that this is a very sensitive subject. In the conversation to come, our goal is not to make light of the situation at hand. Our goal is to inform the listeners about the tragedy occurring in the Southern Baptist Convention. We will exclude names in this episode, but if you want to find more information, go look at the Houston Chronicle articles. Eric, why don't you introduce the topic for us?
So the Houston Chronicle recently came out with 3 different articles about the sex abuse scandal that's been going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. You can find this at the Houston Chronicle online. This article was written by Robert Downen, Liz Olson, and John Tedesco. And it's titled Abuse of Faith, 20 Years, 700 Victims. Southern Baptists' Sexual Abuse Spreads as Leaders Resist Reform. I think it's important to realize in this moment that in the beginning of our podcast we talked about that we're not going to share names of victims. We're not going to share the names of the people accused or the leaders or whatever, because you can go ahead and find that on your own.
Right.
We don't want to get into any of the opinion or whatever. We just kind of want to expose you to this. And so in 2008, there was a motion passed forward at the SBC convention to put forth some sort of software or something to track abusers and expose them in the church, because this person who put it forward had been abused in her life. And in 2008, she was denied. So that was 10 years ago. And so what's happened is that these newspapers, there's been a couple of them, have collaborated together to expose or shine light on these things. In 1998, 380 Southern Baptist churches, leaders, and volunteers were either accused or convicted or stepped down from their position or admitted to abuse in their churches. Some confessed to it, some resigned to it, and there were 700 total victims. And this isn't counting all the people that have not come forward in their abuse.
Right.
So 700, in my opinion, is most likely the tip of the iceberg. And in most of these situations, the victims were shunned for what had happened to them, and they were asked to forgive the abusers.
Right.
So, the church is all about forgiveness. Jesus is about forgiveness. And so, but in this situation, I feel as though this forgiveness has been perverted and been shifted into a light that it shouldn't be. There's 220 offenders that are convicted or that have taken deals, and a dozen of them are still pending. 35 pastors, employees, or volunteers who exhibited predatory behavior could still find jobs within the SBC. SBC presidents and leaders are criticized by the victims for concealing or mishandling abuse in churches and in seminaries. So it's not just the local church that has this problem. Our problem has been in the local church, the seminary, and in the Southern Baptist Convention as a whole. And listen to this. And Will, you brought this statement to me about a week ago whenever we were discussing this. And this is directly from the article. It says, the Southern Baptist Convention governing documents ban gay or female pastors, but they do not outlaw convicted sex offenders from returning in churches. Isn't that crazy?
It's insane.
So, Will, let's just go off the cuff here. What is your initial reaction to all this?
I haven't read. I read through the first article before, but other than today in preparing for this, I haven't read all 3 articles plus watched the video. And my first response to this is just amazement. Amazement that we could have let this get this far, and heartbreak. Just utter. And by heartbreak, and I want to make it important to note that I don't say heartbreak in the term of just kind of I feel bad for the people who have experienced this.
Of course.
I mean legitimately heartbreak. I mean, this breaks my heart that these things happen. And I know one of the videos talks about how, and maybe one of the articles, about how these people are supposed to be people of trust, people of faith. Mm-hmm. Right? These are the people that you go to with your quote-unquote problems, with whatever, and then for them to abuse their authority in this way, and it still brings heartbreak. Right now.
And a lot of people view church members, right or wrong, as set up on this pedestal, that they're supposed to be higher and better than all these other people in the world.
Right.
And pastors, youth pastors, volunteers, part-time people have been abusing that privilege. And honestly, in my perspective, it was so hard to read. I read all three articles in the span of 30 to 45 minutes, and I encourage the listener to go do that too. And it's not as though that I want you to feel bad. I don't want you to read this to listen to our podcast. Like, that's ridiculous. But I encourage people to read it because this is important.
Right.
This isn't something we need to brush under the rug, because that's where the whole problem came from to begin with.
Right. Well, and I found myself going to read it thinking, oh, this isn't going to be that big of a deal, maybe a couple churches. And then when I see things of the abusers haven't stopped, they've hurt hundreds more. Days later, Southern Baptist leaders rejected nearly every proposed reform, going back to the 2008 thing. And then to watch the first video that comes up on this article, and I had to just stop for 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And just sit there and think, like, this is huge. This isn't just, like you said, this isn't something that we can just sweep under the rug.
Right.
There's no way we can address it like that.
Well, one of the big issues in these three articles, because I read them both almost back to back to back, and there's two glaring things that came from it. The first is that these people aren't just going to one church and abusing people. They're going to church to church to church, some 3-4 churches, some over the span of 20 years. This is outrageous.
Right.
Like, this is so far from what the Southern Baptist Convention believes, and even greater than that, from what Jesus taught.
Right. I mean, just like this bullet point right here says on the article, some registered sex offenders return to the pulpit. Others remain there. And then he goes into a pastor. I agree. It's crazy to think that they've gotten away with it. Not at one church, sometimes not at 2 churches, not even at 3 churches.
Yep.
But a couple of churches.
And the second thing that kills me is that I'm such a proponent of the Southern Baptist Convention. Like, I live and die by my convention, and it's the people in charge of it all,
right,
that are probably half the issue.
Right.
And there's just names. I'm not going to read them, but there's so many names. So if you were to go look at this article, there's a little chart, and there are some well-known. You won't even have to look at the name. You could just look at their face,
and you'll know who they are.
And you'll know who
right.
it is. And then it has an arrow that points to their mistake. And it's not as though I'm talking about that somebody lied. I'm not talking about as somebody covered up some money scandal. These people have had people in their church hurt children. This is insanity.
Yep.
And they've covered it up, and they've shunned people, and this type of thing needs to be exposed.
Right. And people see it as, let me just read you a quote. It says, it's a perfect profession, talking about a pastorate,
Yeah.
Southern Baptist.
Right.
Perfect profession for a con artist, because all he has to do is talk a good talk and convince people that he's been called by God, and bingo, he gets to be a Southern Baptist minister. Then he can infiltrate the entirety of the SBC, move from church to church, from state to state, go to bigger churches and more prominent churches where he has more influence and power, and it all starts in some small church.
Yes. So, and this is where I want to pause for a second and talk about education. So, Will and I really love the seminary system. We love that the Southern Baptist Convention provides a way for ministers to get an education to be prepared for the church. Now, the reality is that nothing's going to prepare you for the church till you're in it, and I think Will would attest to that.
Right.
But at the same time, the articles, as I'm reading through them, admit that most of the people that are convicted felons of this abuse have no sort of education. Now, I'm not saying that there's not some that do have it, because there are a couple. But the majority of people that they find that have done these things never went to seminary, never had any sort of church training. They were just said, he's a good guy and he talks a good talk, and we're going to vote on him in the deacons and vote on him in the church, and he's in. And I wanted to be shocked by that. I wanted to be put off by that. But the reality is I've been surrounded by that my whole life.
Right.
Like that is That is literally how every church does it almost. And it's just a tragedy.
Yeah.
And, one of the other articles, I can't remember if it's the second or third one, I encourage you to go read it for yourself. I think it's the second one, talks about how there's not a good approach to hiring people in the Southern Baptist Convention. Mm-hmm. One person who is prominent in the Southern Baptist Convention calls it the Wild West approach, where it's kind of an unknown. We don't know much about this person, but they can preach or they can speak or they can teach. So they must be good to go. So we need to get them in. And the reality is that we can do background checks all that we want to, but there's no ability to track these people.
Right, because some of the churches, as we've already noted, don't report these things.
Yes.
Right, like I think I read that the pastors like to protect their buddies.
Yes.
And in return for them protecting their buddies, they're normally hurting a lot more children that wouldn't necessarily been hurt if they would just report things of this nature.
Right. And another point that it makes is the people doing the hiring ask like 3 or 4 questions. They're usually vague. They don't feel like a screening of any sort. And, it doesn't get anywhere. Now, here's what I want to say about the church that I currently work for, the Southern Baptist Church I work for here at First Baptist. I was asked a bajillion questions. That's more than a billion. It's a ton of questions screening me to do so. So not only did I have a background check, but I had multiple questions from multiple people asking me not only about my ministry and my education, but who I was as a person. And I feel as though if that happens, I'm not saying that there's a perfect way to do it, but I think that would eliminate a lot of the risk when it comes to these children. Because the reality is it's children that we're talking about. It's children, man.
Right.
And it's just ridiculous, and it's unacceptable. And I think approaching it any way other than terrible is a huge misstep, and it's sin. That's what it is.
And I mean, they have this in the article. They talk about, and I won't mention his name, but they call him the Catholic whistleblower.
Yeah.
And how he said, I can't find his quote right now, but how he said that it looks hauntingly familiar. Hauntingly familiar.
And that is awful.
Right. So maybe for the listener who doesn't know, give us a run-up real quick on what kind of happened with the Catholics.
Okay, so the Catholic Church has had the same problem, but they've been exposed much earlier. It's kind of been a running joke within modern society of the Catholics and how they've had multiple people, as far as priests, abuse children. And not only did they do that, but they knowingly took the priest who abused a child, sent him off to a quote-unquote correctional facility, and then they would take that priest and put him back into a different parish. So the Catholic Church got caught on this before it even sniffed in our direction. If you've ever heard of a movie called Spotlight, now I'm not going to endorse everything that's in the movie, okay?
Right?
But it's a great movie as far as all the journalism and the study that they've done. That movie won so many awards, and it was so true to the story because a spotlight, a literal light, was shone down on this terrible thing that the Catholic Church was doing. And as far as the Southern Baptists were concerned, we kind of laughed that off. We said, oh, that's not us. You've got a pope. You've got a guy who speaks for God. And that's ridiculous. And so that this is happening to you isn't a surprise, and you're ridiculous. And I think that was said in ignorance.
Right.
Because now we're falling into it. Right.
And he's the guy they interview is the guy who started to shed light onto the Catholic.
Yes.
And he says, I found his quote. It says, this guy turned to activism because of his experiences, work that brought him closer to those abused in Southern Baptist churches. Their stories, listen to this, their stories and how the SBC handled them felt hauntingly familiar. He said, I saw the same type of behavior going on with the Southern Baptist, end quote.
And for the Catholics, I don't believe in the Pope's authority. Okay, I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I don't submit myself to the Pope. I submit myself to Jesus Christ, and that's it. That's my final authority. Okay, but the reality is that in their system, what they can do is that they can pinpoint you and remove you. That's what they can do because they have a hierarchy. The problem with that is, and really what I really want to dig in deep here with you is that the problem with Southern Baptist churches is that we have church autonomy.
Right.
So that means all churches are on their own as far as a governing body. So even though we report to the Southern Baptist Convention and give money to it and all that, the Southern Baptist Convention can't fire anybody. The Southern Baptist Convention can't pick me up and place me somewhere else.
Right.
That's not how it works.
No.
The church finds and hires its own people, and it's on the local church to do something about it. Now, can the SBC do better? Yes, they can do better. Can the SBC give some sort of software, website, whatever, or training to solve some of these issues, or at least prevent them? Yes, I think that they can. But the reality is that they can't make these churches do that.
No,
because these churches are singular. Even though they're part of a body, they're almost alone. They're very segregated from any other church.
Right.
And I think if you went into a Baptist church, you would know that.
Right.
You would know that. And so they're all the governing body. And so, Will, I want to ask you this question. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but is church autonomy a good excuse?
I don't know that it's a good enough. I wonder, and I'll admit that I'm not too familiar with many of these things, but I just wonder if there's something more that they can do. If there's something more.
Do you mean the SBC or the local church?
Well, both, right?
Okay.
Because I think it starts with the local church, right?
Of course.
With autonomy, we have to think of that in question. That it starts with the pastor at the local church. They have to be, J.D. Greer says in the first article that it says the Bible calls for pastors to be people of integrity, known for their self-control and kindness. A convicted sex offender would certainly not meet these qualifications. Churches that ignore that are out of line with both Scripture and Baptist principles of cooperation. And so even Greer, the president of the SBC currently, notes that it almost starts with the pastor.
Yes.
Right? Because as you mentioned, the Southern Baptist Convention can't kick anybody out. They can't pick you up and move you.
Now, they can dissociate.
Right, but even with that, does that really help anything?
I don't know. It's a church. I think it's a church by church basis at that point.
Right, and so I think it starts with the pastor. I think that the pastor, you have to do something different. The background checks, you have to do different things. Now, in the SBC's case, I'm interested to know if there is, and I think we'll see and we'll talk about it also at the end, is kind of the 10 calls of action that Greer has that's trying to to push these things out. But I don't know if that's enough.
So for the people that don't know a lot about the Southern Baptist Convention, most recently they hired J.D. Greer. He was voted in as the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention. J.D. Greer is, how can I say this in any other way, for lack of better words, he is different than all the rest of the presidents.
Right. But in a really good way.
In a great way.
Yeah.
Let me say that. But so JD's 45, and the people that have been there before him are usually 60 plus.
Yeah.
So it was honestly a passing of the old guard to the new guard when J.D. Greer came up. And you should go listen to J.D. Greer yourself. You should listen to his podcast, Ask Me Anything. You should read his books. You should listen to his sermons online. You should do that. You should form your own idea of J.D. Greer. You shouldn't have my idea of J.D. Greer. You should form your own opinion. But I speak very highly of J.D. Greer. And I think that, not to diminish anything that's happened to any child or to make light of it, but I think J.D. Greer is a good step in the right direction as far as correcting this issue.
Right. And so maybe we should attempt to do to talk about it in this way. Let's go through the 10 calls of action.
Okay.
One by one, all 10, and kind of evaluate it. Is this a good step? Is this something that should happen?
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't. So let's just start with number one. These are from J.D. Greer himself it was in Nashville, the executive committee meeting. He got up on stage and gave these 10 calls to action. Number one, enter a season of sorrow and repentance. Southern Baptists should lament abuse in our churches and repent of our failure to adequately address the issue.
I think that's great. I think we need to realize our colossal failure.
Right.
We like to live in this world where we think we Southern Baptists do it all and we do it right.
Right.
And I would mostly agree with that. That's why I'm a Baptist. That's why I'm a Southern Baptist. Is because I not because I grew up as a Baptist, but because my theology lines up best with Southern Baptists. So I would like to think that as far as our theology goes, we're on the right track. As far as Jesus goes, who we think Jesus is and all that he's done, that's right. And if that's true, we need to look back at this failure, and we need to look at ourselves as failures. That's what we need to do.
Right. So we need to almost stop pointing fingers at people. Like, look at the Catholics. Look at these people. Look at these people.
Yeah. Or,
instead,
oh, look at the Southern Baptist Convention. Aren't they terrible? Or, oh, look at this church, Second Baptist or First Baptist or whoever did these offenses, and point fingers. Like, the first finger that needs to be pointed is at ourselves.
Right. Right. So number one, enter a season of sorrow and repentance. Number two, and this may be one of my favorite on this list.
Okay.
Embrace a new curriculum for holistic care in the early stages of learning of abuse. The curriculum is called Becoming a Church That Cares Well on Abuse. It is a free video-based curriculum. This is important right here, created by a diverse team of survivors, advocates, and experts. And then it goes on to list some of the people who put it up. But it's a free curriculum, and you can sign up at the website. I think that's really good.
Yes.
Right? Now the important thing for us to remember is that J.D. Greear and the SBC cannot force churches
No, they can't
to go through this curriculum.
They can't make them.
Right. And so this is a great aid to use, but they can't force them to use it.
Right, but again, J.D. Greear's not the Pope, right?
Right.
Just because he's the head of the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't make him the guy that stands before God alone, right? We believe that's Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ only. But he's doing all that he can do as far as putting a material out there for people to learn from.
Right. So number two, do the curriculum. Number three, affirm 3 separate statement of principles documents. I like this one too because it goes on to say that 3 separate documents were ratified by all 6 SBC seminaries,
okay,
all 41 SBC state conventions,
okay,
and SBC associational leaders, which signal a collective commitment to address abuse at every organizational level of the SBC.
Yes. So that one in and of itself. So if you're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, so First Baptist Church is under that convention, they are a part of that agreement.
Right.
So in essence, if they decide to not adhere to that, then J.D. Greear and the Southern Baptist Convention can kick you out of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Right.
And that is awesome, right?
Right.
Not that removes anybody's pain, not that justifies the Southern Baptists, but that's literally the maximum sentence for a church.
Right. Well, and it shows that you're making improvements. Like, you're trying to grow. Like, this is the fact that Greear even came out with the 10 calls. It just shows that he's at least trying to do the power he does have. He's trying,
and
to
he's
use.
Different.
Right.
I would again emphasize that he is different than the other leaders in the SBC convention.
Right. And I would encourage you to go read those 3 separate statement of print. We don't have time to read them here, but I would encourage you to go read those. Number 4, churches should take immediate action on abuse prevention and care. Churches, associations, state conventions, and entities should seek to strengthen their policies and practices on abuse. This has been the big thing that I've seen in the articles is a lot of the journalists will ask the churches, hey, what is your policy on abuse? What do you guys think about that? And a lot of the churches aren't entirely sure.
Right.
Because they don't necessarily have an article of abuse because, again, this hasn't necessarily came to light in the SBC. So nobody's really thought about it if it's not directly
Well, at
next to
best,
you.
it's lazy. And at worst, it's irresponsible.
Right. Yeah, it's no excuse for it.
Right.
But this is the biggest thing that a lot of the journalists kept trying to ask these churches for. Hey, what is your policy on abuse? What is your what happens when this occurs? And a lot of the churches didn't know.
They don't know.
They can't come up with something because they don't have that. And so Greear said, hey, we should take immediate action on this thing. Number 5, they should consider requiring background checks at a minimum for all SBC standing committee and trustee appointments. The executive committee should consider integrating background checks into the standard process for evaluating appointees and trustees in a manner that fits our polity. Our goal is to be vigilant to make sure that predators have no place at any level in our structure. So Eric, let me ask you, what else could they do other than a background check? What else?
Well, like I said earlier, I think the questions that you ask people that you hire is very important. I'm not saying that you should ask questions to get somebody to slip up or admit something that's not true. That's not what I'm going for here. But questions like, so you're setting up for Wednesday night and a girl or the opposite sex walks in, what do you do? Right? Is that acceptable? Is it ever acceptable for you to be in the room with a youth? Is it acceptable to invite a youth over to your house? Is it acceptable to text or Skype with youth or whatever it is?
Right.
Is that acceptable to you? And I'm not saying these people aren't smart and they can lie. Anybody can lie. But I think a lot of the times you could save yourself so much pain if we quit focusing on theology and preaching and we looked at the character of the individual. And I think that's when we go to our due diligence and actually call references and talk to references of those references, because this is something we can't get wrong again. Because once you get this wrong again and again and again, you lose the trust of people. And like the article says, it literally murders someone's faith.
Right. I agree. Number 6, churches should re-examine the ordination process. Churches should evaluate how to strengthen screening and background efforts in the ordination process. So what is ordination?
So basically, ordination is whenever a person who wants to become a pastor or a minister walks before his church. The deacons are usually first, and they ask him a series of questions. So they ask him about your theology, about your seminary education, about your family, about what you think personally about a handful of issues. And then you go before the church, and the church acknowledges you and in a way votes on you. It's not like a traditional vote or anything like that. And then people lay hands on you in prayer, and people encourage you, and then that's basically it.
Right.
And because I was ordained at my home church, and I love my home church, but that was it.
Right. So how hard was it to say, hey, I want to become ordained, in that process to start?
Well, for me, I grew up at that church. So every single person knew me at that church. Not to say that should excuse anybody else.
Right.
So I might have been a little different as far as in their eyes of how they viewed people. So that's coming from someone who went to that church for 25 years. Now, for someone that comes off the street, I'm sure it might be just a little bit more, it might be different.
Right.
Because I don't think that they ordain people that aren't church members there. They don't. There's some rules in place.
No, of course. So maybe we should strengthen that.
Oh, dude, yes. Like that all I had to go through was talk to the deacons and get hands laid on me in a church. Not that that's bad.
Right.
I'm really not trying to trash the way I was ordained, because I love it, and it's a memory that I treasure, and there's a certificate in my office of all the men that laid hands on me in prayer. I love that. That's great. You should do that. But there needs to be more.
Right. I mean, the goal of this is not to talk bad about any churches, right?
Sure.
This is something that there's not one singular church that's doing everything wrong. It's a group of 47,000 of us churches.
We're trying to get it right.
That could be doing things better.
Right.
So number 7, Greer says that churches should update the annual church profile to ask about abuse. Questions related to updated abuse policies and occurrences of abuse should be considered for inclusion in the annual church profile completed by SBC churches. So I guess every church makes this church profile and submits it to the SBC.
Yes.
And then they should include abuse if they haven't already.
Yes.
Okay. Number 8, prepare to address abuse at the 2019 SBC annual meeting. The 2019 meeting will address abuse through prayer, reports, events, and resources, right? So this meeting is where all the pastors are supposed to come together, messengers from the different churches, and they talk about these things and what SBC can do and improve in these things.
Like people literally from local churches can stand up and either ask questions or put forth bills or whatever to change things.
Right. Number 9, explore possibilities related to a database solution. The study group will continue to evaluate possibilities for a registry of offenders. That's something that the SBC doesn't necessarily have, which was big back in the 2008 thing.
Yes. So in Texas, they had one.
Right.
But it wasn't updated. It got defunded. They had to get rid of it or whatever. Because the majority of these cases came from Texas that they did all this research on. Like it's everywhere, but the majority of what they found is in Texas. And so they had one for their own convention, but they got rid of it. I can't speak for all, 41 other conventions.
Yeah.
But there just has to be, right? There has to be a list. I mean, it could be a web page and you type in somebody's name.
Right.
And if they come up, they come up. And if they don't, they don't. Like,
right.
How this isn't a thing already blows my mind. It's 2019, people.
Right.
How do we not have a database for sex offenders in the church? It makes no sense.
Right.
It makes no sense. This has to be reported. Now, I know that this is not a catch-all solution because people can slip through the cracks. There's people that there's nothing on. I get that. But the people we do have stuff on, no one knows. No one knows. And a lot of these churches are keeping it to themselves because they're afraid of the defamation suits that could come from it. Because they're scared of what's going to happen to their self-image of their church.
Right.
That's why there's not any one of these things. So anyway, I'm trying not to get on a soapbox here. You keep
going. And even as the article says, they're just trying to protect their buddies.
Yes.
And that's devastating.
Yes.
Devastating. And then finally we get to number 10. Churches should, or that Greer requests, that the executive committee enhances governing documents on disfellowshipping churches and evaluates several other churches. The executive committee should strengthen language in the SBC's governing documents related to mishandling abuse as a grounds for disfellowshipping churches, which means just getting them out of the SBC.
Yes.
They should also do due diligence on several churches specified in media reports on abuse to evaluate if they're standing in lines with our faith and practice. So basically what Greer did was he actually got up there and he called out like 10 churches.
Yes.
And we won't name them here, but
Sure.
he called those out in front of everybody, which means that meeting was broadcasted and there was different entities there and podcast people there. And so everyone has heard what he said.
Well, and he's also been on a lot of news stations as our advocate.
Right.
On our behalf, telling people about it. And that's another reason why I think this is different. I think it's different this time.
Right. And that one's important because when we get to the end here, the goal will kind of try to catch you up where we're at from his 10 calls to actions a couple of weeks ago, and then what the executive committee came out with recently.
Sure.
And so at the end of the episode, we'll get into that, what happened and what they decided to do. So how I kind of want to transition very quickly before maybe we get to that is let me give you what I don't want to do is forget the tragedy this is.
Yes.
So let's just let Albert Mohler remind us real quick. Quote, "The trauma of this story bears tremendous anguish and heartbreak. The SBC and all who love this denomination must pray for faithfulness on this vital issue. Our usefulness for the kingdom of Christ hinges on our response to this horrifying reality. To be sure, there must be heartbreak and concern. That is a place to start. But work must be done. A long road lies ahead. For the church, for the gospel, for the glory of God, we must meet this challenge with fullness of conviction and fidelity to Jesus Christ." Now, I don't know, and the reason I bring this quote up is to kind of transition also into Mohler and Aiken.
Yes.
And I don't know if you read that or not, but that they both came out and apologized for supporting, I really can't remember the guy's name, but they both supported a guy that was listed by the Chronicle of being in the sexual abuse scandal.
Yes.
Right? So Mohler, you may remember exactly.
Yeah, I don't remember specifically.
He came out and said that he supported this guy, and then how back in 2013 he did. Now he came out and said that he shouldn't have. And then Aiken let him speak at the Southeastern Chapel while this guy was still under allegations of
a
lawsuit. And so they both came out and said, hey, we shouldn't have done that. We didn't know about it, this or that. But and the reason I bring that up is not to – I'm a big fan of Albert Mohler and a big fan of Danny Aiken.
I am too.
Got a surprise coming in a couple of weeks. Big fan of Aiken. And I just – the point we need to understand that this isn't just happening in some small church, in some small town, in a small – this is happening everywhere.
No, it's everywhere.
So as we get ready to close here, let's finish off very quickly with what has the executive committee done since the meeting? And what I really want to focus on is one big thing they've done is that they've came out with this list of the churches that Greer said probably shouldn't be a part of the SBC. We need to reevaluate, and said that 7 of the 10 of those, including some of the big ones, which we won't mention, but 7 of the 10 of those have done nothing wrong in accordance to the SBC governing policies. Now, again, I would encourage you to go look this up and read it for yourself. Don't take it just for my word.
Sure.
Right? Because I very well could be misreading it, something. So go look at it. But from what I'm reading is that the executive committee has said that 7 of the 10 have done nothing wrong.
That kind of blows me away. Be honest, I haven't read what you're reading right now, and that blows my doors off. that's unacceptable.
Right. And let me just read you underneath one church. This is what it says. Based on the information provided by the president, we have no evidence that the church as a body violated any of the 4 provisions, which I guess is their 4 things that came in. We believe no further inquiry is warranted based on that information.
Oh, I don't know, man. That's... And here's the deal. It might sound harsh to kick them out. That might be your first thought, the listener.
Right.
But the reality is that there can be reconciliation, there can be forgiveness, there can be looking back to it at another time. And honestly, I don't know how the ban works. I don't know if they ban you from the Southern Baptist Convention forever and you're done, like you're thou who shall not be named, you know?
Right.
Like, I don't know if they do that or if there's a way you can get back in. I don't know. But that does not feel like swift, decisive action. Now, and again, I want to defend J.D. Greer on this. He's not the final say in the executive committee. He is not that. No. He is the spokesperson in the face of the SBC.
I was going to say, I don't know that he even meets with the executive committee meets.
Right.
I don't know that,
and I don't know what he even thinks about this. I don't think he's tweeted about it.
I mean, this came out. I don't know when this article was written. This article was written today at 11 o'clock.
Right.
This morning.
So while we're recording this is February 25th.
Right.
Okay, so it was this morning.
Right. This is brand new information. So I don't know that Greer, I'm sure he hasn't yet formed any kind of article or anything together.
He's probably being very wise in how he says.
Now the important thing to remember here is that we're kind of frustrated at this.
Yes.
But let me read you a tweet from a person who came out as being sexually abused and a bunch of stuff. I won't mention her name, but it says that the SBC spent months working towards change. Undermining efforts, dismissing cover-ups, and abuse brought to light doesn't change what's been done. The EC Executive Committee statement reveals character, lack of understanding, and division. Nothing was gained. We must demand more for the lost and vulnerable.
No, I'm with you.
And see, and that's the crazy thing is that this statement looks bad to us, but it looks even worse to the people who are in this situation.
Yes, our reaction is unworthy.
Right.
In the reaction of the abusers.
Right. And so that's kind of the answer. That's where we're at right now.
And we might come back and do another episode later in response to how the SBC responds to this.
Right.
And it might be a year from now or whenever they do the convention. That may be what we talk about then or whatever. So I kind of want to end with Scripture because I feel like that's where we have to go.
Probably a good thing to do, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want you to end on our words alone. And I think Jesus has something to say as far as it comes to children. And I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 18, and we're going to start in verse 5. And whoever welcomes one child like this in my name welcomes me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to fall away, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck, and he were to be drowned in the depths of the sea.
Thanks for listening to the Pastor and Intern podcast. We want to say thanks to First Baptist Church of Blackshear for being a fantastic church and supporting us in all we want to do. Please leave a rate or review on the app of your choice to get the podcast out to more people. Next week, the topic will be, does theology matter to the regular church member? Again, thanks for listening to the Pastor and Intern podcast.